With the help of Hashem, we are learning Sukah Daf Tes Zayin. We left off on Daf Tes Vav, Amid Base, 4 lines from the top of the Amid. We're going to continue, beginning with referring back to the Mishnah that speaks about one who used schach that's invalid. Pasal schach, one example the Mishnah gave is that the person is using aruchos hamita, which are the sides of a bed. And we're going to have to explain why indeed will boards, when they are not an entirety of a keli, they're not a bed, they're only parts of the bed or they're sides of the bed, why is it considered a keli, or why is it considered invalid for schach? And we're going to quote the sheet of Rav Ami Bar Tavyume, who holds that worn out pieces of clothing, we're speaking about clothing that are made from Gidulei Karka, we're speaking about clothing that other than being kalim would have been kosher to schach. Obviously, one of the 3 rules is it cannot be something that's mekabel tuma. So says Rav Ami that if you have such a small piece that came from the garment, even though currently it's not a keli, since it comes from a keli, it was part of a keli, it continuously remains pasal l'schach. We're going to apply and speak again about mats that we use nowadays for schach. We're going to go back to the rule in the Mishnah that teaches us that hachoitet begodish, that if a person hollows out a haystack, the Mishnah says that was the introduction of the rule, and by Tanoim of Tasav Elohim in Ha'asui, the Sukah is invalid. And we're going to see an exception to that rule, that you can have a haystack and you can hollow it out, and it will be valid as long as you have the 10 tfachim height and the minimum 7 by 7. And then the Mishnah Daf Tezayin is going to speak more about the rule that we already mentioned a few times, both of good achis and of good asik. Good meaning, do we say that the wall asik goes up, which is what we paskin like, as long as you have a halachic wall, which means it's 10 tfachim tall. Even though it doesn't go all the way up to the schach, halachically, we consider it as if it goes mamish all the way up to the schach. And then in the reverse, what happens if you have a halachic wall, because it's 10 tfachim of height, but it was placed adjacent to the schach, and it only goes down 10 tfachim. It doesn't go all the way down to the ground. It doesn't go down within 3 tfachim from the ground. And we're going to learn the Tana that holds that we do say good achis. That's going to be connected to a topic that we learned by Shabbos and in Masechtas Eruvin, known as a mechitza teluya, a suspended partition. And we're going to say, and we're going to compare Hilchas Sukah to Hilchas Shabbos, or we will explain why one should not be compared to the other. And finally, we're going to have on Daf Tezayin Amid Beis the rule that a machatzeles arba'a umashahu, that if you have a mat or a wall that's not 10 tfachim, it's only 4 tfachim and a bit, that it could become a halachically valid wall for a sukkah that has 10 tfachim of height. Even though the wall really, b'metzias, only has 4 tfachim and a bit. And in other words, as we'll see, that we apply the rule of lavud twice on the same wall, we are allowed to do so. And chevra, many other details regarding sukkah. Let us begin again on Daf Tezvav, Amid Beis, 4 lines from the top of the Amid, in this little, relatively in quantity, short Amid, when the Mishnah is referring back, Oy ba'aruchai samita, someone who covered part of one sukkah with the sides of a bed, and the rule that we learned in the Mishnah, as we just finished learning yesterday, that as long as you add roiv schach, right, or exactly 50-50 according to Rav Papa, or you have to have the majority of schach, that's kosher, then we apply the concept, according to Rashi, of bitul. The schach pesula becomes bottled in the schach that's kosher. We view it all as kosher schach, and you have a valid sukkah. But now we want to understand, why is it a problem b'chlal to use the sides of beds? The bed frames and the bed legs were made out of wood. They don't have a receptacle. Of course, when they are all together and they are serving as a keli, you can argue that it's a keli. But l'chayda, if it's only part of it, Why should there be a problem to begin with? Why do you have to rectify it by putting down 50% or 51% of Pesol? It itself should be okay. So L'chora says the Gemara that Leimim is saying, Rav Ami. Seemingly from here we can bring a proof to that which the Amoira Rav Ami bar Tavyume says, to Amar Rav Ami bar Tavyume, that's a chacha b'v'loi kelim, and if a person uses worn out kelim, here means garments. And we're speaking either about a garment made out of cotton or a garment that's made out of linen. And yes, we quoted in the past the sheet of the Rambam that holds that if there is something that's completely nishtanu tzurasan, so we're speaking here about linen, that once you make from the flax, from the pishtan that grows from the ground, you transform it into fibers, that Rambam holds midrabanan, it's not a valid schach. Even though it came from the ground, it's no longer connected to the ground. Even before you render it into a proper bona fide kleli, because since it looks so unlike its source, rabbinically it's not good, but that's only a rabbinic prohibition. On the biblical level, it's before you make it into a garment, it's going to be kosher. And actually, some understand that if we're speaking about a cotton garment, there are certain ways that they would make cotton garments then that it wasn't completely nishtanu tzurasan. So we're speaking about a beged. If not for it being a beged, it would have been kosher eschach. But it became a beged. And now the beged got worn out. And you have a little part of it. So says Rav Ami bar Tavyumi, even if it is not considered anymore a halachic beged, now we learn about this din every now and then, and that is that if you have, let's speak about pishtan specifically, wool or linen. I know wool is not good for schach b'chlal, but the rule of begadim is that wool of linen, if you have a piece of a garment, or call that a patch, even if it's only 3 by 3 finger breadths, it's considered a keli. Because at least aniyim would use it as a patch. But if it doesn't even have the 3 by 3 finger breadth size, then it's b'chlal not a keli. So Rav Ami is saying that even if it's beloi, even if it's worn out, meaning it's not even 3 by 3, right now it's not a keli. Nevertheless, it remains invalid for it to be used as chach. And why is that? Because since it was previously a beged, and once it became invalidated because it's a beged, it doesn't lose that psul, even though right now it's worn out. And that's the contact, that's the correlation that we're making with the Mishnah. Since when the bed was complete, was wholesome, it was considered a keli, and it's not valid for schach. That's why the Mishnah is saying that even though it's only a side of a bed, which means the bed was taken apart, it remains invalid schach. Says the Gemara that that's not necessarily true. And why is that? Because I might counter-argue, Kida Amar Rav Chanan Amar Ami, he said it elsewhere, we'll see the elsewhere in a moment, that you know what Aruchais Amita is referring to. Not that the bed was so taken apart that it's taka not considered a keli right now. No. But Arucha Ushtei Kira'ayim, you know, you have the boards on the sides that go to the length and the boards that go to the width. The length are longer. So either you have one side board that is connected still to 2 of its legs, or b'ketzara you have the wide board that's still connected to 2 of its legs. And we'll see where he said that. But when you have such a part of a bed, it is still considered a keli. Maybe our Tana will hold that if it's taka currently not a keli, even though it came from a keli, it goes back to being kosher schach. Our Mishnah is speaking about a scenario where the bed is still considered a keli, so perhaps the second to last line, hachinami barucho shtei kura'ayim or b'ketzaru shtei kura'ayim. That's why the sides of the bed are considered pasal schach, because it's currently a keli, and therefore you have to go back to the solution of adding psal, which will either let Rav Papa be 50% of the schach area, or a bit more roiv schach kesheda, and only then will the sukkah be rendered kosher. Now, heichi itmed Rab Chanan Amar Rebbe, for what, regarding what Mishnah did he say that the concept of a side of a bed is still referring to a bed that's considered a keli currently? Ahad regarding the Mishnah that we learned Masechtas Kelim, turning to Daf Tezayin Amud Aleph, the Mishnah says that mitom mitames chavila, that a bed frame can only become tamei when it's a chavila, says Rashi, when it's 1 unit. When it's 1 unit. In other words, if the bed is not considered a keli, prior to it being a put together bed, it cannot become tummy, because that's a general rule when it comes to tuma, that something is only susceptible to becoming tummy if it is right now a finished, a completed product. Now the chiddush of the Tanach, which is Rabbi Eliezer, is more than that. What happens if the bed became tummy, and then you took the bed apart? Now, just to make it clear, if you take the bed apart, if it's currently not a keli, it loses its tuma. The question will be, the way Tosfos points out, what will happen if you reconnect it? And the answer for that will be, the tumah will return. You never took it to the mikvah. So one might think, okay, so I should be allowed to take it to the mikvah when it's taken apart. So Rabbi Eliezer holds that umitaheres, you can only really purify it when it's one unit. And if you take the pieces of the bed to the mikvah, and then you rebuild the bed, the tumah will return. It also went to the mikveh, it didn't go to the mikveh as a keli. So holds Rabbi Eliezer. However, the Chachamim disagree. First of all, they hold that mitame sevadim, that even prior to it being a unit, it could acquire tumah. Now that's a problem, because prior to it being a keli, everyone agrees that if something is currently not a keli, it cannot acquire tumah. So that for this we're going to have to explain, evadim means that it's not completely put together, but enough of it is put together, that it could be used. And now, number two, that the Chachamim hold, that if a bed became tamei, because it was considered a keli, it was considered a bed, and then you took it apart, and you have different boards of the bed, and you take it to the mikvah, while it is only evarim, and then you rebuild it, it will not become tamei. End of Mishnah. And now the question will be, how can the Chachamim hold umitames evarim? If something is not a keli, it cannot become tamei. So for that, Amar Rab Chanan, Amar Rebbe, that the Mishnah in Kalim is referring to erucho shtei kora'ayim or ktsaru shtei kora'ayim, and therefore, since it is usable, it's considered keli enough to become tamei. Now, by the way, clear, if it became tamei and you even took that apart, it's not a sideboard and two legs. It's just one part of it. It's just a sideboard. There is where the Chachamim hold that you take it to the mikvah. Now currently, it's fine. But if you take the evarim to the mikvah, and then v'chazar v'chibra, the tumah will not return. Okay. Now the question is, what function can anyone have from only one sideboard, whether it's the longer one, or the length, or the width one, and two legs? So the Gemara says, "L'may chazia either lemismechinu aguda," that if you bring it up and lean it on a wall, if you support somehow this part of the bed into the wall, on the wall, then ulemesav alayu, then you will be able to sit on it, or umishda ashlei, or you will even be able to weave ropes around that part. As long as you can lean it in the wall or on the wall, it can not only function as a seat, but you will be able to lay down over there a small item or a small person. And for that, if you have a picture, you'll see b'diyuk, it works. Okay, Gufa, we learned above. Even I said it to you. Even though we said that our Mishnah doesn't for sure prove the shita of Rav Ami bar Tavyumi, but so is the shita, which is a big chiddush. And when it comes to schach, even if something currently is not a keli, if it was a keli, a part of a keli is not going to be valid for schach. Gufa, we learned above. Amar Rav Ami bar Tavyumi. Guys, we're 6 lines on top of the Amid. Let's move weiter. Okay, let's move weiter. That what? That's chacha biveloyi kalim. If a person used worn out garment, a worn out garment means you have such a small part of the big day of Pishtan, let's say. And if you want to insist that Lerambam, it's not good anyway, so we'll speak about cotton. It doesn't have the minimum shiur. Currently, it's not a keli, but since it came from a keli, it remains puzzle for schach. My beloy kalim, what are we talking about? Amar Abaye Matloniyos, we're speaking about a patch. A piece of a keli was worn out, but some of it remained, that it doesn't even have 3x3 finger breadths. That's important, because if it were to have 3x3, by tzemer upishtin, not tfachim, finger breadths, since at least aniyim would use it as a patch, it remains a keli. But if it's not even that, it's taka not a keli. It cannot be mekabel tuma right now. It will not be mekabel tuma right now. But as far as hilchas schach is concerned, so he holds. It came from a keli. It remains invalid for schach. And even though our Mishnah cannot be used as a raya, but Tanya kavasi derav Ami bar Tavyume, we're going to find a braisa which clearly will be a source for this shita. What does it say in the braisa? Machatzeles, a mat that's made out of shifa or gemi. These are different types of plants. Setch plant, rushes plant. You can all Google and see what they are. In other words, clear, it's something that grows off the ground. You disconnected it from the ground, but you made it into a mat. Now a mat is a problem. A mat is a keli. And also when it comes to the minimum size of a mat. So just like we learned that by a beged fibers, so there's different shiurim. If it comes from tzemer or pishtim, it's 3x3. There's a whole Mishnah in Kalim that we'll quote soon. A mat needs to be 6x6, if I'm not 6x6 tfachim. Then it's considered a functional mat. So it says the Braisa that if you already had a mat, it became invalid because it became a keli, even though now, now it got used out, and the sides got rubbed out, and it's no longer the 6x6 tfachim. Right now it's not a keli. Nevertheless, it was a mat. Clear, the Braisa says, ein misachachin bohen, because since they originated from an object that was subjected to tumah, that psul remains even on its remnant. Furthermore, says the Braisa, machatzeles hakonim, if you have a reed mat, now this is directly connected to the mats that we use. Now guys, appreciate again that the material from what you make these mats are good for schach. The only problem is that it's a keli. But let's clarify something else. What do we mean by a keli? Now there are different standards of keli. If it was never made for anything to be put upon it, it is wood. It is pshute kleyes, it's flat. So if it was made for a hammock, if it was made for a mat, if it was made for a seat, that's a bona fide keli. That's pasal eschach. Something that was made only to give shade, even though it's tied together, it's made together, it's not considered a keli for it to be invalid for schach. And by the way, it's not only if it was made for shade. If it was made to be a mechitza partition to provide privacy, that's also not a problem for schach, because it was not made to hold anything. What we're looking for is for it to be a keli in the context that it was made for something to go on top of it. It's going to be a recipient to something that's going to go above it. So if, says the Braisa, if it's very large, and people would only make large mats from reeds, for schach, that's what they would make it for. So even though it's properly put together, it's a functional shade cover, doesn't invalidate it. And misachachin ba, only when it's small, however you define then the size small, since those small reeds, mats, were made for a mat. You put a mat out, people to step on it. It was made for someone or something to go on top of it. That is what renders even pshute kleyetz into a halachi keli that becomes invalid for schach. Ein mesachachin ba'om. However, Rabbi Eliezer Omer, that I disagree with you. Even the large mat that is generally made for shade is also not valid schach. Af hi mikabelas tuma. Why is that? Because Rabbi Eliezer holds that people would use even large mats to lay upon, and therefore ve'ein mesachachin bo. And at least now this is a clarity. When people say they began to make these kosher for sukkah mats, what is the nekuda here? That it's manufactured by Yidden that made it for schach, which is good. So you know that it was not made not for a mat, not for a hammock, or not for any other function that others might use to lay upon, or to put something on it, or to sit upon it. And on the other hand, there are factories in China that we know what they're making them for, or they're so flimsy that you can argue this was not made for anyone to lay on it. It was only made to be as a mechitza partition to provide privacy, has a kri'iyah between shchenim. Sometimes the material itself shows what it was made for. That will also be valid. But if you have a suffix, what it was made for, then you got yourself a real problem. Even though it's pshute clay aids, but it's a finished product, and it was made to receive something that renders those mats into a proper keli, and they may not be used for schach. And just to finalize, to go back, that what we said was correct. No, we learned just a few daf ago, beginning I think on daf Yudalid, this whole Gezeiras Tikra. Not Gezeiras Tikra. Going prior back, bundles, the Gezeira of a bundle, Chavele Kash, the daf Yud Beis. So that's the pshat. The Gezeira Midrabana not to use a bundle is taka the way Rabbi Yechanan learned pshat, is because you cannot put on your sukkah an item that is stored the way it's on top of your roof. And absolutely, go to Home Depot right now, or go to the kosher stores that sell items for sukkahs. They don't store it the way we put it on our schach. They dafka don't do it that way. It's rolled up. So it's not shayach to that issue of chavilam. It's not, even though that it's tied, the little pieces are tied one to the other, that's not called a bundle. Bundle means you may not place something on your schach in a way that it's stored. And we don't place the mats the way that it's stored. Okay, let's go weit. Hachoited begadish. Sounds like a very clear-cut din in the Mishnah. That if a person has a haystack, in other words, there's a group, a body of Gedulei min haaretz that's not mechuber and not mekabel tuma. Nevertheless, if you went out and you made a hollow, you hollowed out this pile, let's just call this a haystack, even though now you created the 10 height minimum and the 7 by 7 minimum, it's not going to be kosher. Why? Because when you placed that pile, when you made the haystack, it wasn't placed for it to provide shade for anything, because there's nothing underneath it. And it was not placed for schach. If it was not placed for schach, so now that you hollowed it out, even though now the top part of the haystack is providing shade for people that go inside of it, but that's tasav v'lo min ha'asui. And tasav v'lo min ha'asui is a biblical issue. And let's read the Gemara that there is an exception. So Amar Afuna lo yishanu ela she'ein sham chalal tefach b'meshach shiva. He says a gavaldik chiddush. That's only if the haystack was made in a way that in it, or right underneath it, you don't even have one tefach of height, of vacuum, of airspace, one tefach of height in an area of 7 by 7 tefachim. Now obviously, chevra, 7 by 7 tefachim is only a minimum size sukkah if it has 10 tefachim of airspace height. True, but let's not forget the din that we just learned recently, that if you have a corpse tumah and you have a oil on top of it, as long as there is a roim tefach of airspace, then the roof doesn't allow the tumah to go beyond it. It will not be called tumah retzutza. So says Gavaldik, says Rafuna, that if you don't have even that one tefach by 7 by 7, then it's correct to say that the top part of the haystack was not placed and did not function as a shade, as a cover, and therefore hollowing it out creates the problem of tasav v'lo min ha'asui. Aval yeshem chalal tefach, if from the outset when you made the haystack, there was always in it or right directly underneath it, there was an area that wasn't kosher for sukkah. It only had the height of a tefach of empty airspace, but it had an empty airspace. And it occupied 7 by 7 length and width. Since you can argue that from the outset the haystack served as a schach, not for a kosher sukkah, but it served as a cover for the area underneath it. So taka, you have to rectify it to give it the minimum shiurim for a sukkah. You're going to have to hollow out to make it 10 tefachim height. But if you do so, then the sukkah is kosher. Hadei is sukkah, gevaldik, chiddush. And Tanya nami hachi. Now we heard it first from Rafuna, and then we found a brayso that says so clearly that achoited begadish, that if you hollow out a haystack and you give it the dimensions of a sukkah, it says in a brayso opposite of what it says in the Mishnah. Yes, hadei is sukkah. Did we not learn in our Mishnah beferish ein sukkah? How do you resolve the contradiction? Elalav shmamina, that the Braisa is speaking about a scenario that the haystack from the outset had underneath it a very short, hollowed out space. Short, not good for a sukkah. You're going to have to hollow it out to complement the 10 tefachim height, but as long as it had at least 1 tefach height by 7 by 7, then you can say the whole haystack was a sukkah, was offering shade and shelter from the outset. Shmamina. Other people introduced Rafuna, that Rafuna knew about the Braisa, and he said a statement to Faren for the Stira. Some people learned it as a contradiction. In our Mishnah it says, because when you placed the haystack, it was not offering shade or shelter for nothing. We learned in a Braisa that it is a sukkah. So after they brought the Braisa on that, the Braisa must be speaking about a scenario that from when you made the haystack, from the beginning, it was already covering an area. What's that an area? It had 1 tefach of airspace underneath it. How is that called an area? For dinei tumer tzutza, it's called an area. And all you need to do now is to make it from 1 tefach. You have to add 9 tefachim. You got yourself a real sukkah. Our Mishnah is speaking about a haystack that never had a halal tefach b'meshach shiva underneath it. It was never placed for schach. It's not kosher. Now it's kosher. Now you made a hollow. And now let's start learning Mishnayos regarding the rules of the walls of a sukkah. Says the Mishnah, if one will construct walls in a sukkah, but he's going from the schach area, from the roof down, the definition of a wall is at least 10 tefachim. He has the 10 tefachim, but the sukkah, the schach, is much more than 10 tefachim above the ground. So he's rolling it down, like you have the picture here in the right, and it doesn't come all the way to the ground. What's that all the way to the ground? So guys, lavud is a phenomenal other rule. If the wall will come within 3 tefachim from the ground, halachically it's touching the ground. There's no issue. But if im gavoya min ha'aretz shloisha tefachim, our Tanakama will not apply, will not use good achis, will not use the rule that now halacha l'moshe misinai, it's as if it touches the ground. And the reason for that is, as we spoke out in Eruvin a lot, not in water, on ground, that since this is the Lashon Chazal, that gedoyim boikim boy, since goats can go underneath the wall, so it breaks this halacha l'moshe misinai good achis wall, and you don't have a wall on that side. Now guys, don't forget, in all of these Mishnayos, if a person built a 4-walled sukkah and only one was gavoyim in ha'aretz shloisha tefachim, the sukkah won't be possible because you don't need that wall. We're speaking about a sukkah that has 3 walls, one side is completely open, and the entire wall, you're not even remaining with the theoretical 1 tefach or with the rabbinic 7 tefachim. No, is above 3 tefachim. The Tanakama holds psula. But if you built a wall milmata l'mayla, it's touching the ground, or it's within 3 tefachim from the ground. It's 10 tefachim tall. It doesn't go up to the schach. As long as im gavoya asara tefachim, then yes, ksheira. Why ksheira? Because of good asik mechitzta. Now, what you do need for the schach to go, let's say right now, right above the good asik wall. But it's as if the wall goes all the way to the edge of the schach. Rabbi Yossi is more lenient. And he says, we have this concept that we are calling good asik. And the key is you have to have a doifin. Yeah, a doifin means 10 tefachim. You have to have a asara tefachim, but once you have the doifin, it goes all the way up. Kach milmayla lamata. Rabbi Yossi does subscribe. He holds of this good achis mechitzta, goes down, and therefore you're going to have yourself a kosher wall. And if you are relying on that wall, gesundheit, and the sukkah will be kosher. Now we want to understand what's the machlekes. But Ma'iko Mifligi, what's the underlying machlekes between the Tanakama and Rabbi Yosi? Says the Gemara, Mar Sava, Rabbi Yosi holds that mechitza tuluya materes. Guys, mechitza tuluya means a suspended partition. This is a term that we used in Hilchas Shabbos when we're speaking about sectioning off an area to render it into a reshus hayachid. And just like we learned over there regarding a have a mechitza, but it's suspended, it doesn't go all the way down. If for Hilchas Shabbos it's considered a partition, then for Hilchas Sukah it's also considered a partition. Mar Sava, the Tanakama holds that by Shabbos, mechitza tuluya is not matir, and therefore neither is it matir by a Sukah. In other words, the first approach is that we are linking whatever is called a mechitza for Shabbos in this. And we already learned in the beginning of the Masechta, even this Gemara doesn't hold that they are completely alike, but as far as this rule is concerned, and the words that are used in Shabbos is mechitza tuluya, suspended partition, it's either good or not good. And if it's good by Shabbos, it's good for Sukkah. Says the Gemara Tanan Hassan. We learned over there, now this is a Mishnah in Eruvin, but it's connected to this mechitza tuluya. And let me explain what we're speaking about. We're speaking about two chatzeros, one adjacent the other, side by side. We already introduced the concept of the need, midrabanan, for the people that live in the homes going into the chatzar, to make a ruvei chatzeros with each other. Now, if you have two chatzeros side by side, and there is a window or a door that allows access one chatzar to the other, they are able to make one large eruv. If you have two adjacent chatzeros that don't have a way of going from one to the other through a proper door or window, they don't have an option. They are not allowed to. They cannot join together in an eruv. And that's what happened. You had two separate chatzeros. Each chatzar made their own eruv chatzeros, but halachically they cannot join. There was no door opening between them. Now here's the challenge. Right in between these two chatzeros, there is a water pit. The water, some of the pit is in Chatzar A, some of the water is in Chatzar B. And like we mentioned, these two Chatzeros are sectioned off one from the other. If there is an opening, they can all join in an eruv, but there is a wall. And the wall goes right over the water pit. Question is, can members of either Chatzar draw water? Why would they not be allowed to draw water? Based on the concept known as arivei mayam. The waters move back and forth. The waters on the right side and the waters of the left side don't remain static. So since these two chatzeros were unable to be ma'arav with each other, therefore midrabanan, people from Chatzar Aleph cannot take things from Chatzar Beis to bring it into their yard, so they won't be able to take the water. They won't be able to take the water. Now hold on. If we're going to subscribe to good achis mechitzta, then we can argue that, hey, the wall, the halachic wall that goes above the water pit, keilu goes all the way down to the bottom of the water pit. And that should therefore halachically separate the pit into two pits. Each one is only drawing water from their pit. Do we say that or not? And over there we learned the first opinions don't allow for you to use good achis. However, they find a creative solution by adding an additional wall inside the water pit. Let's read it inside. If you have a boy, you have a cistern, you have a water pit that is exactly located in between two chatzeros, and as we explained, these are chatzeros that were halachically unable to join together in an eruv. Thus, no one is allowed to take items from the other neighboring chatzer, and therefore, ein memalan mimenu b'Shabbos. To begin with, you can't take water before you find a solution because of the concept of arivei maya. We viewed the water in the pit prior to a solution to be also from the adjacent chatzar. It might have been there before and it moved to your side of the pit. But what will be the solution? You have to make another partition. It doesn't have to seal off the pit into two, but you have to add a new mechitza that you put inside the pit. Elam kain, asala mechitza asara tfachim. The partition has to have 10 tfachim height. If not, it's not called a partition. We will follow the girsa of Rashi that will skip the next two words, bein mil mailo. Skip that. even though it's going to be included in a line from now, that where do you have to position it? Wherever you want. Either milmata means, guys, milmata means that if the height of the water in the pit is low, either you're going to put this partition all the way down for it to touch the water, or the last line in the Amid, which Rashi says is the milmaila, it can be higher up in the pit. The partition down there in the pit whoever is looking at the screen, it's the top picture, doesn't even have to touch the water. But even though it's milmaila, that's the last line, but it has to be betoich oigno, it has to be within the lip of the pit. As long as this mechitza is within the pit, that is sufficient. And dafka, because we're lenient, we don't say good achis. But on the other hand, you need to have water. People need water. So the Chachamim were, and don't forget that midoi raisa, b'chlal, everything is good, everything is one big reshus hayachid. All of this is only for the Eruv v'chatzeres midrabanan, so you don't say good achis, but to be lenient when it comes to water needs, add a mechitz. So holds the Tanach. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel Oimer, turning to Daf Tezayin Amud Beis. He says that actually, he agrees also that you can't use the wall that goes on top of the pit. We don't say good achis, but he holds that the details of where do you have to place this new wall within the pit is subject to a machloikes Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. That Beis Shammai yoimrim that you may position it milmaila, you may position it milya. Of course, milmata. Milmata means touching the water. Again, milmaila also means within the lip. Beis Hillel holds that it has to be placed milmata. By the way, here, if that's the right version, then Beis Hillel is the machmer. Tosfos, the top little Tosfos, points out that there are other times that this is quoted throughout Shas, and we have an opposite record of what Beis Shammai said and what Beis Hillel said. And there are other places where Beis Hillel was the one that allowed it even milmaila, and Beis Shammai holds only milmata. But whether it's the Tanakama or whether it's Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, whether it's our Girsa of Beis Shammai Beis Hillel or not, it's all predicated on one premise, that the wall that is separating the chatzeros that's running above the oigen, above the pit, cannot be used because we don't say good achis. However, Amar Rebbe Yehuda, that loy tehei mechitza, that this new partition that you are claiming you have to add, why is that gedola? Why does it have a greater power than the mechitza that's already there? The mechitza that's already there is the mechitza that's min ha-koisel shebeneim, the mechitza that's separating the two chatzeros. Because guys, no one says that you have to seal the pit into two pits. So even this new partition that you're putting inside the boir, whether it is milmaila, whether it is milmata, it's just a mechitza. You still have to use the good achis. So if you're anyways using good achis, don't do anything. The wall that's going on the top is echet avant, that has 10 tfachim height, and that can be good achis. Obviously, the Tanakama and Rabban Shimon Gamliel, they would hold that no, that you don't say good achis. Like we just mentioned, if you don't say good achis, how does this new partition help? So we just quoted the Rashi and Amud Aleph, because people need water, and midai raisa you're allowed to carry. So they felt that adding another mechitza is enough for this case. So clearly by Shabbos you see there's a machloikes tanoim whether we subscribe to good achis mechitza or not. And therefore it comes out l'chu'ura that Rabbi Yehuda over there in Eruvin, which is for Hilchas Shabbos, and Rabbi Yossi here by Sukah, that if you're Mershalshel Milmaila Lamata, you're good. L'chu'ura, they say the same thing. And indeed, Amar Rabba Bar Bar Chana Amar Rabbi Yechanan, that Rabbi Yehuda, in the Mishnah in Eruvin, B'shitas Rabbi Yossi Amara, is following the same sheet of Rabbi Yossi in Masechta Sukah. They both hold Mechitza Teluya Materes, based on the rule halacha l'Moshe Sinai that good achis mechitzta. Says our Gemara that I hear what you're saying, you Rabba Bar Bar Chana Rabbi Yechanan, but it lav dafke. I disagree with that. V'loi Rabbi Yehuda savar like Rabbi Yossi, v'loi Rabbi Yossi savar like Rabbi Yehuda. You can argue very well that they are two separate arguments. Yet they're both using the good achis. but you can't say that one will hold of the other. And the Gemara explains beautifully. Loi Rabbi Yehuda Savalaka Rabbi Yosi, because I can argue that Atkan Loika Amar Rabbi Yehuda Hassan. Don't forget that the Mishnah that we just learned is only for a rabbinic need. Midoiraisa, both of the Chatzeros are a Reshus HaYachid. Midoiraisa, you are allowed to carry from one Reshus HaYachid to a neighboring Reshus HaYachid, even though they belong to different people. The whole need of Eid of Chatzeros is only Midrabanan. Okay, so to address a only rabbinic rule, for that we say good achis mechitzta. Aval hachi by sukkah, since the need of sitting in a sukkah and the need of having the minimum 3 walls is the oir isa. Maybe loy. Maybe Rabbi Yehuda will not be moided to Rabbi Yosi, and the same in the reverse. The loy Rabbi Yosi is like Rabbi Yehuda, because I can also argue that at kan loy ka'amar Rabbi Yosi hache here in sukkah. Yes, it's a oir isa, but look at what we're doing. Ella besukkah, that's relative to other biblical mitzvahs. This is only a mitzvah saseh. It's good to know that if a person dwells in a sukkah, if a person dwells outside a sukkah during the Yom Tov of Sukkahs, they won't even get malchus. They're not even violating a lav. It doesn't say don't dwell outside the sukkah. It says basukah station. We're not making light of a mitzvah saseh, but it's not punishable in Beis Din at all. However, Avol Shabbos, since it's the Isur Skila, and we're not saying that if a person violates a rabbinic Shabbos, they're getting Skila, no, but they're going to get a Makas Mardus. In other words, you're beginning with a more severe mitzvah, and again, even a rabbinic violation will afford you some oynish in Beis Din, so it can be viewed as something more serious. So maybe loy. Okay, nukud. And now the Gemara has a problem. In other words, that when the Gemara is rejecting Rabbi Yochanan, and we're saying that even though Rabbi Yosi clearly in Sukkah subscribes to good achis, he will not necessarily subscribe to good achis when it comes to Shabbos. He'll be more machmir for Shabbos. If that is correct, then don't forget, guys, that the Rabbi Yosi was the Av Beis Din in Tzipoidi. And when we hear about stories that happened in the city of Tzipoidi, we could presume it was done based Shitas Rabbi Yosi. So if we are disconnecting, if we're not linking one with the other, the story that we will relate in a moment, Alpi Minase was based on whom? Avada was based on Rabbi Yosi. Says the Gemara, 1 second. There was a story that we'll quote in a moment. After Rabbi Yosi's passing, there is Yerusha by Malchus, and there is Yerusha when it comes to Rabbanus, as it says even all the way in Shulchan Aruch. Rabbi Yosi's son, Rabbi Yishmael, was his Mamala Makim. Rabbi Yishmael made that link. I'm going to stand our ground that we're going to push back against Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yosi Lavdafka will use good achis by Hilchas Shabbos. His son did use it. Says the Gemara, no, lo yalpi Rabbi Yosi. The story was not based on our Rabbi Yosi, LLP Rabbi Yishmael be Rabbi Yosi, who did say that what my father said for Sukah, Rabbi Yishmael will apply for Shabbos. Now, what was the story? The Chiyasi Rav Dimi once related that Pamachas, there was a time that Shachachu v'lo Yeviu Sefer Torah me'erev Shabbos. Rashi says that this story happened during the Roman persecution, and one of the things that they outlawed was reading from a Sefer Torah, especially on Shabbos. So what did people do? When they had a Beis HaKnesses or a Beis HaMedrash in a Chatzir, many batim opened up to that Chatzir, they would not begin Shabbos with the Sefer Torah being placed in the shul. They would have a Sefer Torah in someone's private home. They would leave it there. So if someone would check, they wouldn't find the Sefer Torah in the shul, but then they would have to bring it there for Shabbos. Now, one option would be to make an Eruv Chatzeres. This was left in a Chatzir that they never made an Eruv Chatzeres. Over there, they would bring it right before Shabbos. And one time it happened that they forgot to bring the Sefer Torah from a home into the Beis HaKnesses. Now, what do you do? So what they did was, they had a Gavaldic thing. It happened to be that physically, there was a way of creating a halachic corridor that would link the opening of that home into the opening of the Beis HaKnesses. And guys, even though that you can argue that the corridor is serving two domains, which is the home and the Beis HaKnesses, if you remember, a Beis HaKnesses is not considered a residential home. So a Beis HaKnesses and a home and a chatzar, if there's only two buildings, a shul and a home, you don't have to make an eruvei chatzeros. So what they did is that they created Pashut, a corridor that only linked to the Beis HaKnesses and the home. That area doesn't need to have an eruvei chatzeros. But they created that on Shabbos. That's what's mashma. Let's go read what happened. That lemachar on Shabbos, Perisu sadinim al gabei ho'amudim. There were poles, and they brought there. How did they bring it there is a problem. We're going to amend it in a moment. They brought sheets, and they suspended it over the poles, creating partitions. The Gemara takes it as a given, and we're not going to challenge that, is that these sheets did not go all the way down to the ground. All they did is that they created a 10 tefach height with the sheet. So now you have a corridor into which only one home and one Beis HaKnesses opens. You don't have to make an eruv chatzeros. They brought it and they read from it. Now, that's the story. If you would not allow good achis mechitzta, you would not create a corridor. It would not be good enough. So that is from where we know that in Sipoidi they did use good achis even for Hilchos Shabbos. And again, the Gemara already gave the answer. The Gemara says, no, it's not Rabbi Yossi. We rejected Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yossi did not agree. His son Rabbi Yishmael took it even to Shabbos. Now, just a detail on the story. Perisu, Salka Daitach, don't repeat the story the way you did, because Mehechen Evion, B'Shabbos. They must have brought it from another home in the Chatzar. They didn't make an Eruvei Chatzeros. That was the story there. So then no one would be allowed to take sheets and bring it from a home into the yard. Ella, what happened was Mitzoi Sadir and Perusim, Al Gabe Amudim, the sheets were already near on the poles, but they were not properly suspended. They probably did it other weeks as well. So what they did is that the whole chiddush there is that they created a mechitza, right? They suspended this mechitza on Shabbos. That's a whole other topic. If you remember, oil arai is problematic midrabanan, but that it's not called an oil. The sadinim were already there, right? They added to this type of building is permitted on Shabbos, but they didn't carry the sadinim there. And they found it there, al gabi yamudim, and now that they suspended it on Shabbos, yes, Rabbi Yishmael, but Rabbi Yossi used good achis mechitzta to paskin that's proper mechitzos, and therefore they heviu sefer Torah and v'karuboy. They brought it and they read. There's an added chiddush. Sometimes you bring a sefer Torah, but other members in the shul will disagree with this heter, and they're going to shout you down. Hey, you're not allowed to use a sefer Torah. People were machal Shabbos with it. Everyone agreed that was okay. Okay. Amar Rab Chizda, Amar Avimi. Let's go weiter. And here he's speaking about a sukkah that had exactly 10 tfachim of height. Machatzeles arbo mashu. If you have a mat, now we're going to be suspending this mat vertically, even if the mat only has 4 tfachim and a bit, 4 tfachim and a bit, and we're saying that you have to have a 10 tefach mechitza. And then you can for sure say good asik, perhaps according to Rabbi Yossi, say good achis. He says, really, you don't even need 10 tfachim. If it's 4 and a bit, materes besukah, you can use that in a sukkah, and you're going to create a bona fide doifin, you're going to create a wall. How do you create a wall? So it's very simple, says the Gemara. Because lavud means that if something is within 3 tfachim from its adjacent area, it's as if it's annexed. So since, yes, the sukkah has exactly 10 tfachim of height, if the mat itself is 4 and a bit means that you're lacking less than 6 to come to the full 10 tfachim. So if you put it exactly in the middle, making sure that it's less than 3 tfachim from the ground, it's less than 3 tfachim from the roof, from the schach, then because of lavud, we view it as if it's 10 tfachim. Heichin avid lei, how do you do it? That heichi avid, tali lei, you suspend it exactly be'emtza. making sure pachas mishleish lamato, pachas mishleish lamayla. And since we have this rule, v'chol pachas mishleish kalav dami, so therefore it's considered a proper wall. And the Gemara is going to say, not only is this correct, but it's simple, pshita. Why did we even need him to teach us? We lavud. So the Gemara says, no, there is a big chiddush here. Because Smal the Tema, one might have argued, chad lavud domininon. To say lavud here in one scenario, we'll use lavud once. Today, lavud on the same wall at the same time, maybe lo yomrinon. So Kamash Malan, that we use lavud twice on the same wall. Says the Gemara, I have a problem with this. If that's correct, why did we learn in a Braisa that machatzel is shivo mashu, that if you have a mat that's only 7 and a bit, that's materes besukah mishum doifi. Mashma, you don't have to have taka 10, only 7 and a bit. You chop already, the 7 and a bit means that from one of the sides, you're going to use lavut. But only one side, not 4 and a bit, 7 and a bit. Answers the Gemara, nah. That Braisa speaking about a Sukah gedoyla, not in width and length, gedoyla in height, that if there is a properly tall Sukah, guys, you can't have lavud twice if it's not within 3 tfachim from both sides. So when it's taka very tall, you can only use lavud once. Then that's not enough. That for sure, use lavud once. You don't really need for the doifin to be 10. It should be 7 and a bit, and put it, whether you're going l'shitas Rabbi Yosi, put it within 3 tfachim from the top. So now you have a 10 tefach halachic wall. And omai komash malan. Now l'chayre, if it's a tall sukkah and you're only using lavud once, then again we know we can use lavud. The chiddush will be, the author of this brais will be Rabbi Yosi. His point is that you can even suspend it within 3 from the roof, because we do say good achis. We make the mechitza go down. Umay kamash malan, the meshalshel and the fanis milmaylo lamato, because this Tana is following Rabbi Yosi. If this would not be Rabbi Yosi, then we would not even need a brayser for that. Now the final din. Now that we're speaking about lavud, we're going to go me'inyan le'inyan. We're not going to go to the height of a wall, but we're going to go to the length or the width of a wall. And what did we learn above? That if you have 2 proper walls, the third guy's daf zayin, theoretically the third wall halacha l'meishu misin, it could be 1 tefach. But let's not forget that we also had various doubts whether there is a need to add to it. It's Surah Pesach, you remember. And what we did conclude is that as long as you have the third wall 7 tfachim, then you're good. Even though the sukkah on that side of the sukkah is much more than 7 tfachim. And here also we said the same concept, that you really don't even need a 7 tefach third wall. You only need to have a halachic 7 tefach third wall. How do you do that? As long as the past at the board, we're not focusing on the height, we're focusing on the width, is going to be 4 tefach and a bit, not the full 7. It's also going to be mater besukah mishum doifen. Why is that? Because since you put it within 3 tfachim from one of the 2 other right angle walls, and therefore the rule is v'chol pachas misleish samach l'doifin kalav dami, and therefore again you have yourself a proper third wall. And here again, if you're only using lavud once, Mela in the Braisa above, we said, because they put the doifin near the schach, and Rabbi Yosi is adas yachid, but over here using lavud from side to side, in lavud, it's within 3. You don't have to add, there's no good achis over here. So, Maiko Mashmalon, so the last line of the Amid is, no, there's the chiddush, guys, Daf Zayin. Again, halacha l'moshe misinai, the third doifin only has to be 1 tefach. On the other hand, we learned, and that's midrabanan, that you needed maybe to do a tzuras ha-pesach. It wasn't so simple. They had all those shitas over there. If you remember, 3 statements of Rava. So his vart is, hakamash malan, that once you have a 7 tefach third wall, even though the sukkah goes beyond that, a lot, even midrabanan you're good. But you have to have 7 tefachim. So that's really, it's the fact that you can create 7 tefachim by using lava, that's a given. His chiddush was that unlike other versions in Rava, that when you only have a third wall that's smaller, you have to still create a tzuras ha-pesach until the end, you don't say that if you have a 7 tefach wall. Hakamash malan, that shiur meshach sukah ketana, and we're speaking here about the third little side, because if the sukkah is only 7 by 7, then there's no chiddush at all. The sukkah can be 20 miles long. You have 2 proper walls, right angle. Now you're only adding a 3rd wall. Even midrabanan, you only have to make the smaller size. And what is the smaller size? 7. You don't need a tzuras HaPesach further. I'll tell you more than that. Don't forget, guys, this is one of the unique cases that we follow Beis Shammai. According to Beis Hillel, the smaller size sukkah is 6 by 6. According to that, even midrabanan, all you need to do is to create a 6 tefach. He's paskening, no, the pas has to be in a way that you come out with a halachic 7th small wall, because yes, it has to be 7, but once you have this, the 3rd wall 7 tfachim wide, then l'kula alma, even midrabanan, you got yourself a proper sukkah. Chavra, to be continued.